Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. 3 years after the introduction of the Canon Rebel T7i, Canon they've finally brought us a new model in this range called the Canon Rebel T8i. Now looking at the spec sheet guys, you'll notice this camera is very similar. It still has the exact same ISO range. It is still 24 megapixels. So image quality, I kind of looked at some of the samples. Image quality is not hugely different from the previous model. Although I have provided a link in the description below so you guys can take a look at some RAW files and some JPEGs and kind of see for yourself. But yeah, not a huge change in terms of image quality. This camera is going to be primarily about the new processor as well as some other feature refinements. Another thing I'll go ahead and mention is that this is not an official comparison video, but you will notice that I do mention the 90D quite a bit. In a future video, I'll no doubt give you guys an official comparison, but for the time being, if you have not seen my video on the 90D, I'll go ahead and link to it in the cards and in the description so you guys can kind of get an idea of some of my thoughts on that camera. You can also check out my Rebel T7i video, and that will also give you some valuable information so you can kind of make the comparison with that camera as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that I see a lot of people asking in the comments about the Wi-Fi setup on different cameras. I won't talk about the Wi-Fi aspects of the T8i during the course of this video, but do keep in mind that I have made a Wi-Fi setup video for Canon cameras before, so also check out the description to see that video, and once again, I'm sure I will put that video link in the cards as well. Anyways, for the time being, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the Canon Rebel T8i. Taking a closer look at the Canon Rebel T8i, you guys will notice that it looks basically just like the T7i. So the first thing that I'm actually the most excited about on this camera is something that most people may not be that excited about, but it is actually the flash here. On older models, if you were in automatic mode, where the flash would be controlled by the camera, it would just automatically pop up. Now, some of you say, well, Jeremy, that sounds pretty cool, but I can assure you, it's not always the most cool thing. A lot of people struggle with how to turn the flash off, and occasionally, even in classes and so forth, I'll even come across people that have taken a strip of tape and put it on the camera to keep the flash popping up. So, on this camera, it's nice that you basically just go ahead and you just lift it like this. And if the camera feels like it needs the flash, it will actually go ahead and fire. If not, it won't. But if you don't want it at all, you can of course just leave it down. So it's a nice touch. You also don't have to worry about, little remnants of life getting in here and sort of gumming up the works. And then you have this issue where your camera's trying to raise the flash and it can't, and it acts erratically and all that. So with this new design, you don't have to worry about any of that. Looking at everything else on the camera, if we go over and look at our scene modes right here, it's still set up exactly like the T7i. So basically, instead of having all those mysterious hieroglyphics up here that show you all the different scene mode symbols, once you put this camera onto scene, it's actually just pretty nice because you can go in there and you can change your scene mode just using the touchscreen here. So we hit our Q button and you can go there, and then you get the full list of all of your different scenes, and you can go through everything like this. You even get a nice little description of what this particular scene mode is going to do. So that's really nice. If you guys want me to give you like a sort of like in-depth guide of what all these settings do on this camera, write me in the comments below and just let me know. But anyways, if we do go to a scene mode, where our flash is going to be used, by the way, so if I were to go in here and pick something like nighttime portrait, the camera actually will tell me. Of course, I'm trying to make it tell me. It may not do this on video, but if it is dark enough, it actually will tell me to raise the flash, which is pretty cool. Yeah, there it goes, raise the flash. So once it felt like it was dark enough, it will tell me to raise the flash. So that's how that works out. Now, in terms of processor on this camera, it does have Canon's newer Digic 8 processor. The previous generation camera had the Digic 7. And this basically translates over to some new features. So if we take a look at the camera's video options, for example, if we go into our menu here, On any Canon camera, it's actually a bit interesting. If you go into your shooting settings and you go in here, you actually will not see any video options at all. We have to also actually go into video mode. Video mode is still accessed with this little lever here that also turns our power on and off. We take this and we can go up to the video position. And basically we go into video mode. Now, you can't shoot video in stills. Sorry, you can't shoot video in scene modes. So if I go in here now, you can see it's actually disabled all these settings, but I can just go back and put my dial over to automatic, and now video is fully active. So we can go into our menu and we now see that we have all of our settings. That Digic 8 processor is bringing about things like 4K video. It can do 4K at 24 frames a second. Right now, that is our only frame rate choice in 4K, but we may see some other options. I mean, maybe Canon will do a firmware update to allow us to do other things. I personally really like 24p. It's what I use most of the time for everything, but that's our option there. In terms of 1080p video, we can do up to 60 frames a second. So if you want to see like the 120 frame a second option, Canon, they still make that 90D. That, of course, allows us to have a little bit more capability in a camera and a little bit higher price point. But 60p is also a very nice option on this camera. If we look at our continuous shooting, this is another area where the camera actually has improved. So if I go into, I'm going to just put it into program mode and we'll get out of video. And we can go in and we can do our burst. So we can go here to our high-speed continuous. This camera can do a maximum frame rate of about 7 frames per second. Now, I did notice online that some places I saw they said 7, some they said 7.5. Tell you what, guys, it looks like Canon is actually back to their live view games again. On the 90D, we saw a little bit of a different frame rate whenever we were using this live view display. Shooting bursts versus our viewfinder. This camera is still the exact same. It does increase slightly to 7.5 frames a second if you are using the back screen versus 7 frames a second when you're using the viewfinder. So that's kind of interesting. For those of you that have gotten over to using the more manual settings on the camera, this camera also now has 2 command wheels. So we have a command wheel that's right up here, and then we have a command wheel that's back here. And this actually kind of simplifies Canon's lineup a little bit, because in the past we had, in the previous generation between the T7i and the the T7i and the 80D rather, we had this 77D. And the 77D was basically like the T7i, but it added some features like that rear command dial. This camera just gets the rear command dial, and there is nothing between the T8i and the 90D in Canon's lineup right now. But as you can see, this rear dial allows us to go in here and change our aperture, and then we have our front dial up here for shutter speed, and so we can kind of do those things separately. Another difference on this camera that can most likely be attributed to the new processor is the fact that our battery life improves a bit. This camera can do 800 shots per charge. The Rebel T7i was rated to around 600 shots per charge. Of course, a lot of this could be also attributed to the flash. Apparently, the built-in flash on this camera is a little bit less powerful than the one on the T7i. And so this is something we've seen camera companies do before. Nikon did this with some of their 3000 series cameras. But at any rate, you will see a little bit better battery life on this one than the previous generation. Another thing physically that you'll see is that we have an AF on button. So for all of you that like to back button focus, and yes, I am going to make a video about that at some point in the future. But yeah, if you like the back button focus, this does have an AF on button. So if you don't like that halfway press to activate your focus system, you can now press the AF on button there to do that instead. So that's another thing that we see as a nice little physical change. Going over to this side of the camera, we basically have the exact same setup that we had on the T7i. So we do have a microphone jack here. This is one main reason why if a person is getting into any type of video or vlogging, I always recommend going away from like the standard like Rebel T7 and going up to the I model, because you do get that microphone jack. And if you're going to do any video, having the ability to plug in a better mic, it's going to be an essential at some point in your video making. So that's a nice thing. We have our USB port here, which it is now a micro USB type connector, which is a little more common these days than the mini connector. And then we have a mini HDMI output here as well. So very straightforward there. We have a single SD card slot. This is not a super high speed UHS 2 card slot. It is a standard SD card slot. This is something else that we see sort of like as a difference between this and the the 90D. So if you want to have a faster card slot, the 90D exists for that reason. And in regards to our sound recording, the 90D also gives you a headphone jack in addition to a microphone jack. So that's something else important to think about. In regards to our focusing system with our viewfinder, we do still have the same exact 45-point autofocus system. And yes, as far as I can tell, this is the same focusing system that we also have in the Canon 90D. So pretty similar there. Nothing's really changed. This is also the same focusing system that was on the T7i. It is a good focusing system, and so that's going to be very good for tracking moving subjects, and you're not really constrained to just having your points just at the center of the frame. You can move those around quite a bit. You guys may notice there's a button here for the focus. That's how I was able to go in here and move those modes around. So as you press that, it just sort of scrolls through just like that. Another thing that's interesting about the video on this camera is that I did mention that it does have 4K. I'll go ahead and just show you kind of briefly here. This is something that we could probably look at in more detail in a future video. But if I go into video mode here, I'm going to go back to 1080p. You can see that we get the full width. Now if I go over to 4K, we do see a little bit of a crop. So if I go here and then go there, you will notice that we are a little closer than we just were. And I kind of saw some conflicting reports online. I thought initially that this camera did not have a 4K crop, but it actually does. So that's yet another area where the 90D kind of is, it's a more expensive camera, so it's going to have more features. So yeah, the 90D does not have that crop if you are in 4K. Now, another thing that I noticed is that the camera has support for vertical video. And honestly, I had no idea how this even worked. I was expecting to see like a different video mode in here. So I was actually expecting it to be something like this, to where you'd go in and you'd have some sort of vertical option. I could not find it at all. And so I looked at the camera manual. There is absolutely no shame, guys, in looking at your camera manuals. Anyways, so how you actually have to do this is you go in, and there's an option in here that says add rotate info. And so basically, this is just like what you see with your smartphone, to where the camera knows which way it's being held, just like your phone would, and it automatically rotates. If you have this turned on and you go into your settings here, if you go into some of your videos, you guys will notice, if I come in here, so there's my video. This one's actually vertical. Now if I go into our menu again, go to the playback information here, it says something like change movie rotate info. We can select this option. Then we can go through our videos, and whenever we hit the info button here, it will actually allow us to, you hit the set button rather. It will actually allow us to go in here and change the rotation information. So this allows us to basically have the camera, you can see that little icon over there, sort of swivel around. So this allows us to go in and basically have the camera put a little metadata tag on the video. So that way our program or our smartphone knows which way the video should go. And you can go in and change this even for a video that you shot horizontally. So it's actually a pretty cool setup. Seems to work very, very well. As I'm not exactly a cinematographer. I'm not Stanley Kubrick or anything, but I will admit I felt like a bit of my soul was dying whenever I was shooting vertical video. But I do get it. We're in the social media age, so it is nice to be able to have that option. This is obviously a very good camera for vlogging. It has that tilt-out screen that we all know and love so well at this point. So it's nice to be able to go in there and be able to shoot some video in this fashion. So it's pretty neat there. I will give you guys a little bit more information about this camera later on. Image quality from what I have seen so far doesn't seem to have changed very much from the T7i. I will put some sample photos in the description. I'll have some RAWs and some JPEGs there. You can go ahead and download those and let me know what you think. If you guys want to see a longer tutorial on this camera or any other comparisons, maybe we could compare this to like the 90D. I did mention the 90D a bit in this video. Or maybe we could even compare it to the T7i. Just write me in the comments, let me know what you want to see. And until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.